The morning sunlight streamed through the large windows of the corner cafe, casting golden stripes across the polished wooden floor. Jessica pushed open the door, the familiar jingle of the bell announcing her presence. The scent of fresh coffee, mingled with warm pastries, and the quiet hum of conversation created a cozy, inviting atmosphere. She pulled her hoodie tighter against the early autumn chill, the dark fabric framing the bold trident tattoo that snaked across her forearm. It was impossible to miss a precise, intricate design, every line deliberate, every point sharp and purposeful. Jessica had earned that tattoo the hard way. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, a fleeting impulse. It was a mark of countless hours spent in grueling physical training, missions that tested her endurance, her courage, and her very will to survive. The trident symbolized her induction into one of the most elite forces in the world, the Navy SEALs. Only a select few could claim it. Each point represented something sacred: honor, sacrifice, and loyalty. To her, it was a daily reminder of what she had endured and the people she had fought alongside. As she stepped further inside, she noticed a few regulars sitting at their usual tables, sipping coffee and tapping away on laptops. She offered a polite nod to the barista, who returned a smile. But not everyone in the cafe was so welcoming. A group of 3 men sat near the back, leaning toward each other and whispering with exaggerated amusement. Their eyes flicked toward her, and she caught the edge of a smirk aimed her way. Jessica ignored it at first, adjusting the sleeve of her hoodie slightly to cover the tattoo, though it was only partially hidden. She was used to the glances, the sideways comments, the unspoken judgments. Civilians often didn't understand the significance of the symbols she bore. To them, it was just a tattoo, a decoration. But for her, each inch of ink told a story of hardship, endurance, and relentless training. Every line had a tale: freezing nights during field exercises, grueling physical tests that left her muscles trembling and her body screaming, and the mental fortitude it took to keep moving when her mind begged her to stop. The whispers grew louder. "What's that supposed to be?" one of the men asked, voice barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the cafe's ambiance. Jessica felt the familiar flicker of irritation. She could feel her pulse quicken, not from fear or anger, but from the surge of energy that always came when she was confronted by ignorance. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. This was nothing compared to the high-pressure situations she had survived overseas, where mistakes could mean life or death. She scanned the room briefly. Mark, her friend and fellow veteran, sat across from her at the table by the window. He noticed the tension in her jaw and the subtle clenching of her fists. "Let's just grab a table outside," he whispered, a concerned tone in his voice. But Jessica shook her head, a small, determined smile tugging at her lips. Today, she wasn't leaving. Today, she would face them. As she moved toward the counter to place her order, the men's whispers turned into open laughter. "Looks like a pirate doodle," one of them said, and the others chuckled. Jessica's stomach tightened, but she kept her movement smooth, her voice steady when she finally addressed them without turning fully. "This isn't a doodle," she said calmly. "It's a mark earned by very few, a symbol of something bigger than just me." Her eyes met theirs briefly, steady and unflinching. The cafe seemed to quiet slightly, though most patrons were oblivious. Jessica finished her order, balancing the tray in one hand, her forearms still raised enough to display the tattoo's intricate lines. Each detail of the trident caught the light, sharp and bold. She felt the weight of her own history, the invisible stories behind that symbol pressing against her skin. She knew that soon their laughter would stop, if only because the reality of what it represented was impossible to ignore. The men, still smirking, leaned back slightly. Jessica returned. To her table, setting the tray down gently. She let her eyes wander around the cafe briefly, observing strangers who were content to sip coffee, read, and go about their lives, unaware of the battles that some fought quietly, far from their gaze. Her tattoo wasn't just ink. It was proof of courage, resilience, and the sacrifices made in silence. And today, someone would notice. The laughter grew louder, sharp and mocking, echoing slightly off the cafe's walls. Jessica kept her gaze on her coffee, pretending not to notice, though every nerve in her body was alert. "Looks like a pirate." "Doodle," one of the men snorted, leaning back in his chair. "Yeah, probably just some chick showing off," another added, smirking at his companions. Their words were shallow, thoughtless, but the weight of ignorance often stung worse than outright insults. Jessica's fingers tapped lightly against the ceramic mug, her breathing even, yet she could feel the quiet surge of resolve building inside her. Her friend Mark watched from across the table, eyes flicking nervously between Jessica and the men. "Let's just go," he whispered, concern etched across his face. "It's not worth it." Jessica shook her head gently, sipping her coffee as if nothing had happened. This wasn't about pride. This wasn't about proving herself to strangers. She had faced death, hunger, exhaustion, and fear in ways most people couldn't imagine. A few loudmouths at a cafe weren't going to intimidate her. Her mind wandered briefly, recalling the early mornings during Navy SEAL training, freezing dawns when the world seemed silent except for her own pounding heart, the bitter taste of determination in every step of a 5-mile run while her body screamed to stop, the camaraderie formed with teammates who became family. She remembered how failure wasn't an option. Quitting wasn't just frowned upon, it wasn't conceivable. That mindset had carried her through combat zones, through operations where the stakes were unimaginably high. It had forged her into someone who could face any challenge calmly, with patience and focus. The men were still laughing, unaware of the storm of experiences standing mere feet away. Jessica could feel the invisible barrier between them and reality, a gulf formed by their lack of knowledge. She knew they couldn't grasp the hours of sweat, pain, and determination that the tattoo represented. And yet, in this moment, she could give them a glimpse of fleeting yet undeniable insight. The thought brought a faint, confident smile to her lips. One of them leaned forward, squinting. "Seriously, what's that supposed to mean?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Jessica's heart rate increased slightly, not from fear, but from the energy that always came before a confrontation. She set her coffee down carefully, making sure her movements were deliberate. She didn't want to scare them. She wanted them to understand. She wanted them to realize that some symbols, some stories, are built on more than appearances. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm and steady. "It means dedication, sacrifice, courage. It means running toward danger when everyone else runs away. It's a reminder of the people I've served with and the commitments I've kept. It's earned, not bought." The words were simple, but they carried weight. For Jessica, every syllable echoed a lifetime of experiences. For the men, they were unfamiliar, uncomfortable truths. The cafe seemed to shift around them. Other patrons glanced briefly, sensing a subtle tension, but unaware of the depth behind the exchange. Jessica's gaze didn't waver, meeting each of their eyes with quiet certainty. The smug expressions faltered. The laughter died down, replaced by confused silence. Their amusement was clumsy, a thin mask over their discomfort at the reality they were suddenly confronted with. Mark exhaled quietly, impressed despite himself. Jessica had that effect, the ability to command attention without raising her voice, to communicate more in her presence than most could with hours of explanation. She leaned back slightly, folding her arms, letting the weight of her history speak through her posture. The men shifted, suddenly aware that this wasn't a casual joke. It was a glimpse into something far greater than they had expected. For the first time, one of them glanced away, a flicker of guilt or perhaps realization crossing his face. Jessica allowed herself a subtle, knowing smile. She wasn't finished. They would understand eventually, or at least they would carry the memory of this encounter. A simple tattoo had sparked something far more profound than mockery, a lesson in respect, courage, and the power of lived experience. Jessica stood slowly, deliberately, feeling the weight of every eye in the cafe shift toward her. She wasn't angry, not really, but there was a quiet authority in her posture, a calm confidence that demanded attention. The three men, once laughing and whispering, suddenly froze, unsure how to react. Their smirks faltered as the faint hum of curiosity and tension filled the room. Jessica lifted her arm deliberately, the intricate trident tattoo catching the sunlight streaming through the window. Every line, every sharp point, gleamed with precision, a symbol forged through relentless struggle and undeniable courage. "This," she began, her voice calm but firm, "isn't just ink. It isn't decoration. It's earned. It's a reminder of commitment, endurance, and sacrifice." Her eyes scanned the table, meeting each of theirs, holding them steady. "People see it and assume it's just a design. But this represents everything I've worked for and the people I've served alongside. The ones who faced danger, fear, and exhaustion with me. The ones who never quit. This is for them." The men shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances that betrayed uncertainty. Jessica didn't move closer. She didn't need to. The room itself seemed to contract, drawing attention to her presence. Her calm authority was palpable, a contrast to their nervous energy. For the first time, they realized this wasn't a casual woman showing off a tattoo. This was someone who had lived a life of discipline, courage, and unimaginable trials. Jessica took a breath and began to share a fragment of her story, her tone measured yet compelling. Training wasn't easy. Every day started before dawn. Every step tested the limits of my body. I ran miles when my muscles screamed in protest. I carried packs heavier than I thought I could lift. I swam through freezing waters, faced obstacles meant to break me. And every time I wanted to quit, I kept going, not just for myself, but for the team beside me. That's what this tattoo represents. The cafe fell into an uneasy silence. Even strangers not directly involved in the conversation couldn't help but notice the shift. There was a gravity to Jessica's words, an unspoken authority that silenced the casual chatter. Her story, though brief, carried the weight of countless experiences that few could imagine. The men at the back table no longer smirked. Their faces showed discomfort, perhaps even awe. She paused, letting the silence linger just long enough for her point to sink in. Every line of this tattoo is a memory, a victory over fear, a testament to what it takes to face the impossible and come back alive. It's more than a design. It's history, effort, and honor etched into my skin. And yes, I earned every ounce of it. One of the men opened his mouth, then closed it again, unsure how to respond. The other two exchanged nervous glances, clearly realizing that ridicule was no longer an option. Jessica's gaze held them in place, not with aggression, but with the undeniable authority of someone who had faced challenges far beyond their comprehension. The room's energy shifted. The laughter and mocking whispers that had filled the air were replaced by an almost tangible respect. Mark, sitting quietly across from Jessica, watched with admiration. He had seen her confront fear in combat zones, lead her team through grueling missions, and survive impossible conditions. But this quietly facing ignorance with authority and grace was another kind of courage. Jessica's presence alone communicated what words could not. For the first time, The men at the table truly saw her not as a civilian, not as a woman with a tattoo, but as someone who had faced danger head-on, someone whose life had been forged by trials they could barely imagine. The smirk had vanished from their faces, replaced by hesitation and perhaps the faintest glimmer of respect. Jessica exhaled softly, keeping her posture strong but relaxed. She had made her point. The laughter, the mockery, the ignorance, it was no longer relevant. Her tattoo, her story, and her presence had spoken louder than any words they could have offered. And in that quiet tension, a lesson had begun to take root. Jessica paused, letting the silence stretch for a moment. The three men at the back table had stopped shifting nervously, their eyes fixed on her arm, on the tattoo, on the woman who had turned mockery into authority. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar rhythm that came before recounting a story she had told countless times, yet each telling held its own weight. She wanted them to understand, not just the symbol, but the human effort, the struggle, and the courage behind it. This wasn't a tale of heroism for applause. It was the truth. Each part of this tattoo, she began, her voice steady, represents more than I can even describe fully, but I'll try. Training for the SEALs isn't just physical. It's mental, emotional, and spiritual. Every day tests your limits. You run, you climb, you carry weights heavier than yourself, and you do it over and over again. Sometimes you fail. Sometimes it hurts so badly you think you can't continue. And yet, you push on. You push on because the team relies on you, because failure isn't just personal. It can cost lives. She shifted slightly in her seat, letting her forearm rest on the table so the tattoo gleamed under the cafe lights. I've spent nights without sleep, miles from safety, in freezing waters, with only the stars above me and the fear of the unknown pressing in. I've seen friends hurt, in danger, and I've learned that courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about moving forward despite it. That's what this tattoo represents. That's what every line, every point signifies. The men leaned slightly forward now, silent. Their previous smirks had vanished entirely, replaced by a combination of astonishment and discomfort. Jessica noticed, but she didn't pause. She continued, I've faced impossible situations where failure meant more than just personal loss. I've lost teammates I considered family. I've watched the consequences of mistakes play out in ways that changed me forever. And through all of that, this tattoo became my reminder. It's proof of perseverance. Proof that you can endure more than you think, that you can survive, that you can fight for something bigger than yourself. She looked around the cafe briefly, meeting the eyes of a few other patrons who had been watching quietly. Some nodded, silently acknowledging the gravity of her words. Some continued with their morning routines, perhaps unaware of the emotional weight in that space. But the men at the back table couldn't look away. Their casual amusement had evaporated. Jessica's story had painted a reality they couldn't dismiss, a world they had no experience in, and now a profound awareness of why. And it's not just about me, she added, softening her voice. It's about the people I served with, the people I survived with, the ones who made sacrifices I can never forget. This tattoo is a symbol of honor, of dedication, of courage, in the face of the unimaginable. To those who don't understand, it might look like ink, but to anyone who has lived it or seen it, it represents everything that can't be put into words. The cafe remained silent, the atmosphere charged. Even Mark, her friend, could barely speak, moved by the intensity and honesty of her account. The three men at the back table no longer laughed, no longer whispered. Their faces reflected a dawning realization. This wasn't a prank, a stunt, or a casual choice of body art. This was lived experience, courage etched into flesh, a narrative of resilience that demanded acknowledgement. Jessica leaned back slightly, allowing the weight of her words to settle. She had said enough for them to begin understanding, even if just partially. Her tattoo was no longer merely ink, it had become a story, a lesson, a testament. And the men who had mocked her had no choice but to reckon with it. Respect, quiet, and undeniable, had begun to replace ridicule. The cafe's atmosphere had shifted completely. The laughter and whispers that had once filled the air were replaced by a quiet, almost reverent tension. Jessica had finished recounting her story, and the men at the back table sat in stunned silence, their faces pale and uncertain. Her words had painted vivid images of freezing waters, grueling exercises, and missions where the stakes were life and death. The cafe's patrons, sensing the gravity of the moment, lowered their voices, instinctively giving space to a woman whose presence demanded attention. Jessica exhaled slowly, trying to release the tension coiling in her shoulders. Just as she relaxed slightly, the cafe door swung open, letting in a gust of crisp morning air. Heads turned briefly, distracted by the sudden movement, but most patrons quickly returned to their routines. Jessica, however, froze, her pulse quickening in a way that had nothing to do with fear. A man stepped inside, tall and imposing, yet his posture carried a quiet, commanding calm. His clothes were casual jeans and a button-down shirt butt. The subtle Navy SEAL insignia on his cap drew Jessica's immediate attention. Recognition surged through her. Her mentor, the SEAL commander who had guided her through the most grueling, life-defining challenges of her career, had arrived unexpectedly. Time seemed to slow for a brief moment as their eyes met across the room. The three men at the back table stiffened, sensing something monumental in the energy shift. Jessica's story had been enough to silence them, but now, the presence of someone who carried undeniable authority in her world made the room feel smaller, more intense. Even strangers who didn't recognize him felt the change, an unspoken gravity in the air. The commander moved with a measured pace, scanning the cafe with sharp, observant eyes until they landed on Jessica. A subtle nod of acknowledgement passed between them, loaded with history and unspoken respect. Jessica returned the nod, a mixture of pride and familiarity passing through her gaze. This wasn't a casual encounter. It was a meeting of two people, bound by shared trials, mutual respect, and countless untold stories. The men at the back table watched, their smirks gone, replaced by confusion and awe. They had witnessed the story behind the tattoo, but now they faced living proof of its significance. The commander's presence amplified Jessica's credibility, a living testament that her experiences were real, intense, and worthy of admiration. Their ignorance had been exposed not just by words, but by the unmistakable authority of someone who had trained, led, and survived alongside her. Mark, seated beside Jessica, leaned slightly forward, his eyes wide. He had known about the commander's visit only briefly, a small surprise, but seeing the interaction unfold in the cafe, he could feel the electricity in the room. Jessica had always carried herself with confidence, but the presence of her mentor, elevated her authority to something palpable, almost physical. The commander paused a few steps from Jessica, standing still, observing the subtle dynamics at play. His eyes met hers briefly, a silent communication passing between them. No words were necessary. Their shared history and mutual understanding spoke volumes. The three men at the back table shifted uneasily, realizing for the first time that this tattoo was not just a symbol, it was a story validated, endorsed, and respected by one of the most elite leaders in the military world. A few cafe patrons glanced over, sensing the tension and authority emanating from the scene. Whispers died, conversations halted mid-sentence, and even the barista paused while pouring a cup of coffee. Jessica straightened slightly, her posture impeccable, confident but grounded. The room had become a stage, and all eyes, knowingly or not, were drawn to the quiet exchange between a veteran and the commander who had helped shape her. For a brief moment, Jessica allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She had come here to drink coffee, to enjoy a quiet morning, yet she had unwittingly turned it into a lesson in respect, honor, and recognition. And now, with her mentor present, the lesson was complete. The next moment, she knew, would cement it. The cafe had fallen into a hushed stillness, a kind of silence that feels almost tangible. Conversations had stopped mid-word. Phones paused. In mid-tap, and even the barista's hands hovered above the espresso machine, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. All eyes were drawn to Jessica, and the man who now stood a few feet away, a tall figure exuding authority without a single word, the SEAL commander who had mentored her through the hardest chapters of her life. He stopped, subtly shifting his weight as if signaling recognition. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand in a crisp, precise salute. The gesture was small but monumental, a symbol that carried the weight of honor, experience, and respect earned over years of impossible trials. Time seemed to stretch. The three men at the back table, once mocking and arrogant, froze completely. Their previous amusement had vanished, replaced by stunned disbelief. They understood now, with clarity that shook them, that this tattoo represented more than ink. It represented survival, discipline, and courage recognized by one of the most elite military leaders in the world. Jessica's chest swelled with a quiet, measured pride. She mirrored the salute, her movements exact, honed by years of military training and protocol. Her forearm, adorned with the trident tattoo, gleamed under the cafe lights. She didn't need to speak. Her body language communicated volumes. In that simple act, she conveyed humility, recognition, and the completion of a silent conversation that had begun the moment the men started mocking her. The salute spoke louder than words ever could. The group that had laughed moments ago sat rigidly in their seats, their expressions betraying shock, guilt, and awe all at once. The smirks were gone, replaced by an almost childlike awareness that they had underestimated her entirely. Their laughter had been misplaced, their mockery meaningless in the presence of lived experience. This was a moment that demanded respect, and for the first time, they understood that respect isn't given lightly, it's earned through action, perseverance, and courage. Mark, seated across from Jessica, leaned forward, silently watching the exchange with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. He had known about the commander's arrival, but witnessing the salute in person was breathtaking. The scene wasn't just about protocol or tradition. It was about acknowledgement, validation, and the deep, unspoken bonds forged through trials only a few could comprehend. It was history in miniature, unfolding in a cafe that had moments ago been filled with casual chatter. Even strangers who weren't directly involved felt the weight of the moment. Patrons paused mid-conversation, turning discreet glances toward Jessica and the commander. The subtle shift in the room's energy was undeniable, a collective recognition that something extraordinary was happening, a quiet lesson in valor and respect. The three men at the back table looked at each other, eyes wide, their mockery evaporating completely under the weight of the silent communication. Jessica held the salute for a few heartbeats longer than necessary, allowing the significance of the gesture to resonate. Her posture was impeccable, her gaze steady and unwavering. This was a culmination, not just of her story, but of her journey. The sacrifices made and the courage displayed over years of service. The salute wasn't just formal, it was personal, a bridge between two lives shaped by adversity, and a powerful statement that honor can never be mocked. Finally, she lowered her hand, the room exhaling as if collectively releasing the tension it hadn't realized had built. The commander nodded subtly, a silent acknowledgement of her achievement, her resilience, and the story etched into her skin. For Jessica, it wasn't about triumph over ignorance. It was about integrity, recognition, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from living a life that demands respect. The lesson had been delivered. The three men at the back table shifted in their seats, murmuring apologies that sounded small, hesitant, and inadequate. Jessica smiled gently, offering no harsh words. Their ignorance had been corrected, and the room's energy had shifted. Permanently, respect had replaced ridicule, and in that quiet, intense moment, the power of experience, courage, and acknowledgement had spoken for itself. The cafe slowly returned to its usual rhythm, though the energy remained different, heavier with a quiet awareness. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, and the faint aroma of coffee lingered, mixed with the residue of a moment that would not be forgotten. Jessica settled back into her chair, her body still carrying the subtle tension of adrenaline and pride. She took a sip of coffee, savoring the warmth, but her mind was elsewhere. The morning's encounter had unfolded in ways she hadn't anticipated, leaving a lasting impression on both strangers and herself. Mark leaned across the table, studying her with quiet admiration. "That was incredible," he said softly. Jessica smiled faintly, shaking her head. "It wasn't about them. It never is." She traced the edge of her tattoo with her fingertip, feeling the familiar lines beneath her skin. The trident had been a marker of her journey. Yes, but today, it had become a teaching tool, a visual testament to the lessons she had lived and learned. She realized that the tattoo's meaning had expanded beyond her own life. It had become a message to those willing to see, listen, and understand. The three men at the back table were still there, slouched and subdued. Their earlier mockery had completely dissipated, replaced by awkward gestures of apology and hesitant glances toward Jessica. She acknowledged them with a polite nod, offering no harshness. There was no need. She had said what needed to be said, and the silent salute from the SEAL commander had reinforced the lesson. Their embarrassment was evident, but so was their newfound understanding, however fleeting or incomplete it might be. For Jessica, the moment wasn't about humiliation. It was about recognition, respect, and the subtle triumph of lived experience over ignorance. Her thoughts drifted to the countless people she had served alongside, many of whom had sacrificed more than she could ever articulate. Some had never returned, and some had returned changed, bearing scars, both visible and invisible. She remembered nights under alien skies, the cold bite of the ocean, the constant weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. Every mission, every trial, had been preparation for life beyond the uniform, though few were aware of the lessons carried. Home. Her tattoo was a bridge between those worlds, a symbol that connected the intensity of service with the ordinariness of civilian life. Jessica glanced around the cafe, noticing the subtle shifts in demeanor among the patrons. A few had paused, mid-sip, eyes lingering on her arm and the story she had shared. Some seemed inspired, though quietly so, while others were simply absorbing a lesson about courage and respect in a way that might linger long after they left. She realized that stories like hers, small but true, had the power to reach people. Even in brief encounters, to challenge assumptions and to ignite reflection in unexpected places. She felt a warmth of quiet satisfaction. Today had been more than a confrontation. It had been a teaching moment, not through words alone, but through presence, history, and integrity. Respect had been earned, and the reminder of her own journey, the sacrifices, the discipline, the unyielding courage, had been reaffirmed in a tangible, unforgettable way. This was the subtle power of lived experience. It commands attention, invites reflection, and reshapes perceptions without fanfare or theatrics. Mark finally reached over, tapping her arm lightly. "You've changed this place," he said, nodding toward the subdued group and the hushed murmurs around them. Jessica smiled, acknowledging the truth. The cafe, like her story, had been touched, however briefly, by something larger than the ordinary, and she knew that the ripple effect would persist, carried forward by the people who had witnessed it. Some would remember the tale, some the presence, and some the silent, commanding salute. But all had felt the weight of courage, sacrifice, and honor in their own way. She leaned back, taking a deep breath, letting the moment settle within her. The morning's events would remain with her, not as a trophy of victory, but as a quiet affirmation of her journey, the principles she had lived by, and the subtle, enduring power of respect earned through courage. For Jessica, this was a victory far more meaningful than applause. It was the acknowledgement of a life lived with integrity, courage, and honor. Later that evening, Jessica sat at her apartment desk, the soft glow of a desk lamp illuminating her journal. Her fingers hovered over the pen, pausing as she recalled the morning's events in vivid detail. The cafe, the mocking strangers, the shift in atmosphere, the SEAL commander's arrival, and the crisp, commanding salute all replayed in her mind like a scene from a movie. She took a deep breath, realizing how powerful the day had been, not just as an encounter with ignorance, but as a profound reminder of what her life had been built on. She traced her tattoo absent-mindedly with her fingertips. Each line told a story, each sharp point a memory. But now, the tattoo had taken on an additional meaning. It was no longer only about her achievements, her perseverance, or the trials. She had survived. It had become a bridge between her world and the civilians who knew nothing of the sacrifices behind the ink. It had become a symbol, not just of courage, but of understanding, proof that even brief interactions could teach, inspire, and transform. Jessica thought back to the three men at the back table, their smirks gone, their laughter replaced by hesitant acknowledgement. She remembered how the room had shifted, how every patron had felt the subtle gravity of the salute, and how respect had replaced ridicule without a single raised voice. It struck her how little it takes to remind people of truths they often overlook, that courage is earned, sacrifice is real, and honor is not a casual thing to mock. Mark, sitting quietly beside her during the cafe encounter, had said little, but his steady support reminded her that shared understanding, even in small doses, carries immense weight. Today had been more than a teaching moment for strangers. It had been a reaffirmation for her, a quiet but powerful confirmation that she had lived a life worth respect. She had been tested, molded, and tempered by experiences most would never. Imagine in today, that truth had been recognized, however briefly. Jessica's mind drifted to the countless comrades she had served with over the years. She remembered their faces, their voices, the small gestures of trust and support that had defined their unity. Some were gone, some were injured, and some carried scars invisible to the eye. Her tattoo, while deeply personal, represented them. As well, it was a tribute, a connection, and a living memory etched onto her skin. Today, the lesson had expanded further. Strangers had glimpsed it, and in that small way, her story had become something larger than herself. The realization brought a subtle warmth to her chest. Even brief interactions could ripple outward, leaving traces of understanding in unexpected places. Respect doesn't always require recognition, applause, or ceremony. Sometimes it's conveyed quietly through presence, integrity, and the willingness to live authentically. Today, the salute had done just that. Its impact lingered not only on Jessica, but in the minds of those who had witnessed it, imprinting a subtle but enduring lesson about courage, honor, and the weight of lived experience. Jessica set down her pen and leaned back in her chair, feeling a calm satisfaction settle over her. The day had been ordinary in one sense, just a coffee run, a few strangers, A morning like any other, but extraordinary in another. In a small, quiet space, she had conveyed a lifetime of experiences, a truth that could not be denied, and a lesson that would ripple silently onward. She smiled softly, realizing that moments like this, small yet profound, are often the ones that endure. They remind us of what truly matters: courage in the face of challenge, the integrity to stand tall when tested, and the subtle power of respect earned through lived experience. Her tattoo, once a personal symbol, had become a messenger. Its story had been shared, its meaning recognized, and its impact quietly immortalized in the minds of those who had witnessed it. Jessica exhaled, a sense of closure washing over her. The salute, the acknowledgement, the brief, powerful lesson, it was all part of a larger journey. And in that moment, she understood the simple truth: courage, honor, and respect leave their mark far beyond the person who bears them, echoing quietly but profoundly in the lives of others.